Hi. Thought I'd come on live, talk to my audience. There may be some people here before I'm done. I really hate getting into American politics. It's so pointless. And it tends to result in some really bitter fights without any kind of resolution. There's a way to resolve these issues because I'm not an American. But I am transgender. It took me a long time to learn to say, I can say that and it doesn't matter if other people agree because they don't decide that for me. I decide that. I've been saying it my whole life. People have just been laughing it off. So, of course. And I've actually had it said to me, everybody would want to be a man if they had a choice. I've had women say that to me. My mother. Yeah. Well, if we had a choice, we'd all want to be men because men have all the power. So it's seen as a power play, a power grab. And so, under that kind of oppression, I just kind of let it go and went, well, there are many ways to be a woman with women's lib. I can be myself even in a female body. I can, even though I'm, I can maximize it. I've got this extremely feminine body. The men seem to really enjoy it. So why don't I just head on out into life and make the best of it? And so I've tried. And I've received so much unwanted and uncalled for criticism on my personality. And as I think back over the years, I never really tied it all together, but the criticism inevitably was pretty much saying you're too masculine for your gender and you need to feminize yourself. But it took much more specific phrases like, you're too self-confident. How could you possibly know that? And, in places where they weren't too concerned about looking like they were sexually discriminating, they would just flat out say that women aren't capable of what I was attempting. Women weren't capable of knowing that much, of understanding that much. They weren't capable of that much wisdom. They were always telling me what I was and was not allowed to be or do or know or feel or how I may behave. I've been told how I may and may not dress. And it's not like, oh, you can't wear that. I mean, sometimes it is. But for instance, on Saturday when I went to a funeral, I wore a black shirt and a black coat. I wore my only decent pants. I wore my only decent shoes. I wore my best hat. I was dressed for a funeral. I wore a purple satin shirt because it was the only dress shirt I had that was not in a gay, cheerful, bright color, because purple is a funeral color. So my pants were bright and my shoes were bright because my favorite things are bright. And my best hat is a unique creation. You've seen it. But to me, I looked somber, dressed down, and heck, just this side of normal. And I kept getting commented on. Everybody who met me. I don't know if they were complimenting or they were held aghast by it or what, but they all wanted to tell me that I was dressed too loud. And that's what it's been like. They tell you to have faith in yourself, that self-assurance is the most, confidence is attractive. Self-assurance is good. And yet then they say, but you have to say, I think, and I might be wrong, but, and well, in my opinion, and please don't take this the wrong way. And well, I don't know, maybe it's like blah, blah. You're supposed to carry yourself in this uncertain way. And they don't say that to men. They say that to women. They say that to me. I've run into other women who've had the same problem where people are like, oh, you're just too assertive. You're too aggressive. You're too sure of yourself. Oh, you're too arrogant. I get that one a lot. And I heard people say it of men like my father, but not, it's more acceptable. And so I've often thought, well, maybe the whole point isn't that, I hate my body. And I learned I learned to get used to my body. Can't say I learned to love it, but I learned to appreciate it. You know, the way you appreciate a cesspool for holding all your crap so that you don't have to have it next to you. You don't love it, but you understand its value. You understand its need. It may even be a particularly nice cesspool, and you can appreciate that. It's like, well, if you have to have a cesspool, one with a good lid, bonus. And so I learned to live with my female body and my female voice. And I don't hear my female voice the way you do, because the sound transmits along the jawbone, and everybody hears a more bass note. So when I talk in a low note, I don't hear the ultra vem voice that's coming out of my mouth. And when I do hear it, it's always been really uncomfortable. Just like looking at my body in the mirror has been either admire that woman with a sense of detachment, or, God, that's me. That's what they call dysphoria. Now, this new law, so there are ways that we could deal with that. One of the ways we could deal with the need in transgender is to stop telling people how to behave entirely, utterly. To walk up to a guy and tell him to stop flipping his wrist like that and to start talking more strongly. Don't tell him that he should be chasing the women harder. Don't walk up to him and tell him his hair's too long or the jewelry looks too feminine. Don't walk up to a woman and tell her she could be pretty if only she'd whatever. That would be a really nice place to start. We'd probably lose a large portion of our transgender population simply because they were free to be themselves without going through all the nuisance that transition requires. So I thought long and hard about that. I thought about how in my dreams and fantasies I'm a man, and in my nightmares I'm a woman. Put that one on for size. That one actually triggers me, and I didn't expect that. I'm always a vulnerable woman in my nightmares and a hero in my dreams. And most of the time I'm genderless. But yes, that's another problem with being female, feeling powerless and vulnerable. Again, if we stopped treating people that way. So this new law, let's change tax. This new law that they're proposing in the States, they're talking about it as a way of, I'm not really sure what excuse they're using for it. But the outcome of the law is that persons will only be legally recognized by the law, will only be legally recognized as the gender to which they were assigned at birth based on some doctor's guesstimate of their genitalia. I haven't seen a lot of baby genitalia. In fact, I've seen a few child genitalia from babysitting days, but I haven't really seen a lot. I don't know just how obvious it is. I mean, most of the time it seems to be obvious enough, but there's plenty of examples where they have messed that up. And I'm not sure how this new thing is going to apply to intersex people who had ignorant doctors. But then they're saying, well, if you still want to insist that you're not the gender we thought you were when you were born, you're going to have to provide genetic proof. That is to say, genetic testing. Now, a lot of the trans people are going all like, they're going to require genetic testing. It's like, no, they're going to require genetic test results from you. You get to decide whether or not to pursue it with genetic testing. Like, no, stop treating me like a woman. I'm a man. Prove it genetically. Well, look, see, I have an XY chromosome. Because, of course, if you haven't, and that's the goofy part there is that XY, XX chromosome thing. We're taught in high school that there's these two variations of the chromosome, but they have discovered that actually there are a good half a dozen variants based on which bits of the chromosome are actually present or not present, or how they're coded. That you can have people who present 100% feminine from childhood onward, and yet are XY. You could have people who present 100% masculine from childhood onward that are XX, and that there are alleles, and alleles are like little, they're the legs, and I don't know. See, when you think of it as X and Y, which in fact is kind of what the molecule looks like under a microscope. But then when you dial down and you look with a better microscope, better than we could back when Trump and I were educated in school, you discover that they have more to it. That that's not a simple stick figure. Those lines have more lines in them, and there's more stuff going on, a lot more stuff going on. And so you cannot define gender genetically and scientifically definitively. You cannot define it by genitalia, which, by the way, is none of your business. Who's out there looking at all these kids' genitalia and deciding what gender they are? Doctors, parents, yeah. Which is a really flawed system, because by now, don't we know doctors aren't perfect? Don't we know doctors carry their own levels of bigotry, their own viewpoints that affect their ability to do their job? Now, the upshot of this is that folks like Caitlyn Jenner, and I'm using Caitlyn Jenner because everybody's heard of Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner is going to be sidetracked whenever there is anything going on that involves a gender separation, whether that's bathrooms or hospital rooms or army drafting or sign up volunteering, and or barracks or a camp or prison. I'm trying to avoid prison because a lot of people think, well, you shouldn't have broken the crime, you shouldn't have broken the law. And it's hard to argue with that one, although they're wrong. But I want to try and come up with things that even those jerks would find valid. Drafted into the army, for example. They'd be putting women in men's barracks. And why are we separating the genders in the first place? Think about it. Why are we separating the genders? Now, personally, I appreciate gender separation because I find that men's bathrooms are a lot dirtier than women's bathrooms, and I get that experience from having used them when I'm in a hurry and from having cleaned bathrooms for a decade and more. That men are dirtier than women. I don't care how many examples of dirty women you come up with and clean men. As a generalization of the population, men are dirtier. So one reason for a gender separation might be because women don't want to deal with that. The one most people assume is because men tend to be rapists, or that's the assumption. There's been a lot of proof that rape is not a gender thing, that women can rape, and that anybody can be a rape victim. Anyone can be a rapist. Anyone can be a rape victim. And character is the only thing that tells you whether or not someone is going to do that. If ego and power is the most important thing to that person, rape or not, you probably should kind of back off and give that person a lot of space to protect yourself, because if they're not going to rape you, they might still abuse you in some other fashion. People who put power and ego first generally are abusive. So taking somebody who identifies as a woman and sticking her in with a bunch of men, or taking someone who identifies as a man and sticking him in with a bunch of women, either way, you're going to have a problem. The bunch are going to be upset about the stranger in their midst. They're going to be uncomfortable. They're going to feel like their gender club has been invaded. They're going to mistreat that person in some fashion, whether that's rape or abuse, whether that's beatings, whether that's verbal abuse and ostracism. Did you know, on the one hand, we say, if someone is like X or Y, you should avoid them. But did you know that that in itself is a form of abuse? Avoiding people is a form of abuse. You are neglecting their emotional needs and their need for human social companionship. And it's not your responsibility as an individual, but it's our responsibility as a community. And we really need to come up with some solutions to that. And this new law is not a solution to that. Just cast a sheep in among the wolves because, a sheep didn't have a woolly coat at birth. Grey Wolf, the famous author, was not an Indian. He was a white man, but he self-identified as an Indian. And he went the distance. He learned to be and do all that is required of an Indian warrior by the community of Indians. And he was honored by them as one of their own. And when someone tried to clock him, to uncover his past, and we call that clocking in the transgender community, when you go to someone, they're a trans. And we do it. I wish it didn't matter. I wish I didn't do it. I do. I go up there. I try to clock every trans person I meet, but I don't do it so I can single them out in any way. I do it because I want to feel more connected. I want to go like, oh, there's another one of us. And that's the same, it's the same personality. It's the same human impulse that is used to say they're not one of us. We're a long way from getting that out of our system. But when you isolate someone and other them because they're not one of us, that is when you start to have problems. And when you start, so you start throwing trans women in among piles of men. Seriously, it'd be kinder to put a bullet to her head. I mean, if you're going to be that way, just stop hiding behind cutesy little stuff and go all out fascist. Build the death camps. Build the trains. Start exporting the chosen victims. Just go there. Go there or don't, would you please? Because if you went there, then we could actually take action against you personally instead of having to play this mealy-mouse game of diplomacy with bigots. Because that's what this is. The bigots have gotten in charge again. Every 20 years or so, these bigoted people rise up and take back the power. And the worst part about these bigoted people is, where they're operating from? They're operating from a place of fear. They are letting fear make their decisions. They are letting their courage be a false paper thing in front of them. Their violence is the closest they have to courage. They don't even have the self-control to avoid going to violence from their fear. They are frightened. They are trying, in vain, I might add, to control the world around them so that it will be predictable, stable, familiar, unsurprising, and therefore not frightening. Because only that which is familiar is unfrightening. Ask my parrot. You bring home a new parrot toy that doesn't look like something he's looked at before, and he won't look at it for a year. I've had a Boeing hanging from the ceiling now I took it down for a little while, but I've had it for close to 10 years, and I still can't get the parrot to get on it. As far as he's concerned, that thing is a python quietly waiting and lying in wait. And that's what these conservative people are doing. They're terrified of everything that isn't already familiar. These are the people that kill innovation. When Ayn Rand wrote Anthem, one of the things she was trying to address was we had one of the brothers who was discovering he discovered an underground railway, an ancient subway line, and in it a light bulb, and figured out how to illuminate the light bulb, figured out electricity, and ran to the hall of candle makers to tell them about, this new thing. We don't have to suffer eye strain. We don't have to suffer house fires. We can get beautiful, bright illumination, and we can all work late into the night, and we can see properly, and it's going to save us so much labor and trouble. And they cast him into solitary confinement, and I think maybe eventually killed him. I can't remember, but he was singled out for horrific punishment. From the very beginning, because he was an innovative mind, he was stuck as a street sweeper. They deliberately prevented innovation. People who showed signs of having a creative mind were put into the most dull, stultifying jobs possible if they couldn't be killed, straight out, murdered or executed for something. And that's because the conservative mind hates change. Change is uncertain, and the conservative mind is a person gripped by their own fear. This isn't a coward. That is what it takes to be a conservative. You may come up with all kinds of reasons why you're not afraid, but you like things familiar. But the bottom line is you don't step out of your comfort zone because you're a coward. And you want the rest of us to conform to your comfort zone so you don't have to deal with your own fear. I'm just not going to do it. I can't. It would be easier for you to find courage to face uncertainty than it is for me to stop being my own natural self. And fear is not an own natural state. You can do better than that. People can do better. When it comes to having the courage to face things, people can do better. Nobody tuned in.